Hello, I'm Kaiser and welcome to Moose Reads. Before I get started, I want to say that the opinions that I give here are my own opinions. They are extremely subjective. If I dislike a book, it is not a reflection on the author and it is not a reflection on people who do like it. Different people have different tastes, and that's okay. Today, I will be reviewing the first 7 books in the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. I read the first 6 of these sometime last year, I think, and got the 7th book from the library at the beginning of December and decided to read the rest of them all over again. I also read them in chronological order, not release order. For any of you who haven't read the Murderbot Diaries, which you should, the 5th book, Network Effect, and the 6th book, Fugitive Telemetry, were released in reverse order. This is relevant because while most of the books are episodic and you only need to remember the broad strokes to read the next one, Book 7, System Collapse, very much picks up where Network Effect left off, and the details have a bit more weight. For me personally, I didn't even remember the broad strokes, so a reread of Network Effect was absolutely necessary. The rest I read out of love. Also to make this review more consistent. There should be chapters marked out for each book if you only want to hear my thoughts on specific ones, or, more likely, Book 7. Although, if you've read the rest of them, you probably don't need anyone, least of all me, to tell you to read the next one. It's probably pretty obvious already that I adore this series, so I'll just say here that all of these are 5 stars for me and not bother repeating it in the individual sections. Additionally, consider this a warning that the review for each subsequent book is likely to contain spoilers for the one before it. If you haven't read this and don't like spoilers, I'd recommend just watching the first review, or just go read them and come back. Most of them are pretty short. Right. So the first book in the series is called All Systems Red. The description says, in a corporate-dominated spacefaring future, planetary missions must be approved and supplied by the company. Exploratory teams are accompanied by company-supplied security androids for their own safety. But in a society where contracts are awarded to the lowest bidder, safety isn't a primary concern. On a distant planet, a team of scientists are conducting surface tests, shadowed by their company-supplied droid, a self-aware sec unit that has hacked its own governor module and refers to itself, though never out loud, as Murderbot. Scornful of humans, all it really wants is to be left alone long enough to figure out who it is. But when a neighboring mission goes dark, it's up to the scientists and their Murderbot to get to the truth. You know, I'd never actually read the description of this book before. I don't think it does it justice. I first read this book entirely because of word of mouth, and I loved it from page 1. Wells does an excellent job of creating a strong and unique voice for Murderbot. She also started this book at exactly the right place, in the middle of action, but not in a way that feels forced. Her world building is divvied out a little at a time, mostly organically. When she does throw exposition at us, it's done smoothly through Murderbot's musings and never felt tedious or overbearing. I like the plots for all of these books, but honestly, this one is in the bottom half for me. It makes sense, it goes at a good pace, and it's engaging. But if I wasn't so invested in the amazing character Wells had created, I probably wouldn't have cared nearly as much about what was happening. All the same, I was invested, and overall this was a great way to set up the series as a whole. The second book is called Artificial Condition. The description says, it has a dark past, one in which a number of humans were killed, a past that caused it to christen itself Murderbot, but it has only vague memories of the massacre that spawned that title, and it wants to know more. Teaming up with a research transport vessel named ART, you don't want to know what the A stands for, Murderbot heads to the mining facility where it went rogue. What it discovers will forever change the way it thinks. This is probably my least favorite of the series. It's not bad by any means, it's just one of the weakest links in a very strong chain. All Systems Red left Murderbot more or less free, and now it's trying to figure out what it wants. It decides the best place to start is to sort out its half-remembered past. The problem is that sorting that out takes very little time in the grand scheme of things. So Wells had to add in other elements to make the story engaging while allowing Murderbot to figure things out. It ends up taking on a security job for some people, pretending to be an augmented human to avoid trouble. Again, this plot was fine, well-paced, and engaging, but I never really got invested in its clients or their problem, so it wasn't my favorite. I do love art, though. I thought the interplay between it and Murderbot was extremely enjoyable and made a section of this book that would otherwise have probably been very dull quite entertaining. In all honesty, it was probably my favorite part of the book. Okay, there are 2 spoiler thoughts I have for this one. I assume the spoiler-free people have already left, but here's the warning. One of the reasons I felt this was one of the weaker plots is that Murderbot doesn't really resolve it. The people it's working for are trying to get back their research, which was stolen by a company they were contracted to do other work for. They think the meeting to retrieve their data is a bit sus, so they hire a security consultant. And yeah, they were never getting their research back. They do, in the end, because it would be very unsatisfying to send them off without it. But they don't get it back because of anything Murderbot does. Someone one of the researchers is friends with within the offending company contacts her secretly to return the data. Murderbot goes to the meeting just in case, and that's that. Murderbot does then have to rescue the client from impending doom, but it still left the book in the position where the problem we were following was resolved more or less on its own, and Wells had to create a new problem for Murderbot to solve in the climax. I just didn't like it as much. The other thing I wasn't crazy about was the way Murderbot interacted with a sex bot it met in the course of the book. The sex bot works for the bad guys and is being ordered to do the job that a sec unit like Murderbot would usually do. It has no control over its existence and actively asks Murderbot for help, but Murderbot is very callous towards the sex bot. It does free it, in the end, but it says specifically that Murderbot is freeing the sex bot not for its own sake, but because of something some other sex bots did relating to Murderbot's past. I'm glad that Murderbot freed it, especially since, in my vague memory of this book, I thought it didn't. But given how much of this series is focused on the concept of bots as slaves and the immorality of that situation, it didn't feel good to watch our protagonist behave dismissively and largely antagonistically to a bot that had no choice and clearly didn't want to be doing what it was ordered to do. I'd also sort of like to see this character return later, and hopefully see Murderbot demonstrate some growth on this front. It hasn't happened yet, and I largely suspect that it won't, but it would be nice. Okay, next up is Book 3, Rogue Protocol. The description says, Sci-Fi's favorite antisocial AI is back on a mission. The case against the too-big-to-fail Grey Chris Corporation is floundering, and more importantly, authorities are beginning to ask more questions about where Dr. Mensa's sec unit is. And Murderbot would rather those questions went away, for good. That description wins the prize for least effective. I'm impressed. Grey Chris is the company from the first book that tried to murder Murderbot's clients, and while the stuff in the description is part of the book, the main thrust is that someone asks Mensa in an interview about another Grey Chris installation that was abandoned, and Mensa says someone should look into it, so Murderbot decides to do so. This is probably my second favorite, although I haven't had that much time to settle with 7, so maybe it's my third. We once again end up with new people that I wasn't that invested in, but the action in the plot felt a little more high stakes, and I really enjoyed how it unfolded. It probably also helped that this is where we really start to see Murderbot evolving as a character. Prior to this, it wasn't sure what it wanted and was mostly going along to get along. In Rogue Protocol, it makes the active decision that it wants to help Mensa. It also has to learn how to fight differently because its previous method of exchanging fire until the other guy died won't work when it can't easily get repaired. There was some degree of this in the previous book, but I felt like it was more prominent in this one, and I liked seeing it. The fourth book is Exit Strategy. The description says, Murderbot wasn't programmed to care, so its decision to help the only human who ever showed it respect must be a system glitch, right? Having traveled the width of the galaxy to unearth details of its own murderous transgressions, as well as those of the Grey Chris Corporation, Murderbot is heading home to help Dr. Mensa, its former owner, protector? Friend? Submit evidence that could prevent Grey Chris from destroying more colonists in its never-ending quest for profit. But who's going to believe a sec unit gone rogue? Wow, these descriptions are terrible. Murderbot prepares to deliver the information it gained in the last book to Dr. Mensa, only to find out she's gone missing. It figures out she's most likely been abducted and is being held hostage by Grey Chris and decides to go rescue her. This is another one where I wasn't necessarily invested in the plot, but because we're returning to people we've gotten to know and who are important to Murderbot, I'm invested in what happens to them. Certainly, this book is in my top half as far as enjoyment. I don't really have much else to say about this one. Next, we jump ahead to Book 6, Fugitive Telemetry. The description says, when Murderbot discovers a dead body on Preservation Station, it knows it's going to have to assist station security to determine who the body was. How they were killed, that should be relatively straightforward at least, and why, because apparently that matters to a lot of people. Who knew? Yes, the unthinkable is about to happen. Murderbot must voluntarily speak to humans. Again! I liked this book better the second time, that's for sure. The first time wasn't its fault, really. I was just really excited about where Network Effect was headed, and getting this one in between it and System Collapse was massively disappointing. Once I put it in the proper order, and had System Collapse waiting for me, I could appreciate this book for what it was. Still, what it was not my favorite. In fact, it's competing with the second book for my least favorite. Again, it's not bad at all, it just doesn't have as much going for it as all the others. Fugitive Telemetry really felt like Wells was stalling because she wasn't sure what she wanted to do with the series next. The plot is interesting enough, but it isn't really connected to the overall story in any meaningful way. It felt like filler, even the second time around. That's all there is to it. So, back to Book 5, Network Effect. The description, such that it is, says, when Murderbot's human associates, not friends, never friends, are captured, and another not friend from its past requires urgent assistance, Murderbot must choose between inertia and drastic action. Drastic action it is, then. Welcome to my favorite book in the series. There's a large chunk at the beginning that is basically just set up for the actual plot, and it's fine, but it's not important in and of itself. Murderbot is on a research expedition with a few of his friends from Preservation and Mensa's eldest daughter, Amina. When they get home, they are immediately attacked, and Amina and Murderbot are abducted by the enemy ship and dragged through a wormhole. The enemy ship in question? Art. So Murderbot has to protect Amina while trying to figure out what's going on. So I don't think there's anything I can say about this without spoilers. Technically what I just said is spoilers, but only enough to set up the actual plot of this book, so I'll let it pass. Either way, if you don't like spoilers and you are still here, watch out. I said I loved Art and the interplay between it and Murderbot, so the return of Art was sure to land well with me. Art being dead was less good, but it sure did make me feel things when Murderbot found out and broke. I absolutely loved the way Murderbot responded to the situation. It wasn't the best response in the scenario, but it certainly felt genuine. I love me some authentic character work. Thankfully, Art is not actually dead, just mostly dead, and Murderbot solves plot A and revives it. Then we can head into plot B, save Art's crew. I was significantly less invested in plot B than plot A, but I love Art, and Art loves its crew, so it mattered. Also, there's some other stuff that happens with regards to plot B that was truly excellent. Mostly, the Murderbot books are very linear. There aren't flashbacks, and there are very few asides. But Network Effect is a very sharp departure. There are multiple sections in this book that come after a file heading that are snippets from Murderbot's time on preservation. These are interesting, and they aren't entirely out of place where they appear, but they are a bit bizarre. And then you find out what that file actually is, and it's excellent. See, Murderbot and Art copy Murderbot and modify its code to serve as a malware program to fight a hostile system being employed by the bad guys. We get to see Murderbot 2.0's adventures, which is extremely fun. Murderbot 2.0 is similar to Murderbot, but also quite distinct. When Murderbot 2.0 encounters a sec unit aboard a ship holding several members of Art's crew, it decides to enlist its help by sending it the file we've been reading in bits and pieces, and telling it how to break its governor module. So then we add 3 to the roster. This is also the only book so far that has multiple POVs. It's mostly Murderbot, but we also get sections from Murderbot 2.0, and then at least one from 3. I'm honestly impressed by the way Wells handled these different sections. Murderbot and Murderbot 2.0 are ostensibly the same person, but because one is an android and the other is malware with limited to no storage capacity, differences arise. Wells masterfully navigates two characters who need to be reasonably alike while still making them distinct. Similarly, since 3 is also a sec unit, there was a risk of making it too similar to Murderbot and not its own character. Even harder since there was very little time to establish it at all. But again, Wells does this excellently. I just love this book so much. And when it ends with Art inviting Murderbot to stay on for another mission, I was desperate to see where the series went. Which is why it was so disappointing the first time around when I went into the next book, Fugitive Telemetry, only to have it step backward. But now book 7 is out, and we finally get to move forward. Ish. Book 7 is titled System Collapse. The description says, following the events in Network Effect, the Berisha Stronza Corporation has sent rescue ships to a newly colonized planet in peril, as well as additional sec units. But if there's an ethical corporation out there, Murderbot has yet to find it, and if Berisha Stronza can't have the planet, they're sure as hell not leaving without something. If that something just happens to be an entire colony of humans, well, a free workforce is a decent runner-up prize. But there's something wrong with Murderbot. It isn't running within normal operational parameters. Art's crew and the humans from Preservation are doing everything they can to protect the colonists, but with Berisha Stronza's sec unit heavy persuasion teams, they're going to have to hope Murderbot figures out what's wrong with itself, and fast. This still isn't quite what I was looking forward to, but I can't say I'm disappointed. This is another one where the overall plot is kind of blah for me, but some of the elements that move that plot got me. Mild spoiler, but Murderbot has developed PTSD. It experienced a trauma flashback that triggered a restart, and now it's worried about its ability to do its job. This is compounded by the fact that it's running out of drones to help it, and even the drones it does have are hampered by the setting most of this book takes place in. This book is part evolution and part payoff to Murderbot having to learn to fight smarter. I really enjoyed watching it try to get through things with so few resources and very high stakes. I also enjoyed watching Art try to take care of Murderbot while it floundered a bit. Honestly, the day I don't love Murderbot and Art is the day I quit the series. They are my favorite, always. Okay, the rest is spoilers. I expect some of you watching are in the position of having read 1 through 6 but not gotten 7 yet. So if you don't want spoilers, now is the time to pause or close the video. I really like what Murderbot comes up with to sway the colonists near the end of this book. It's a good direction for it as a character. I don't even think that part is properly done paying dividends. It put together a presentation about how the colonists were likely to be treated if they signed on with Barish Estranza, but I don't think it's quite hit home how all of that relates to it. And I do think we'll get there at some point, so I'm looking forward to it. I also want to see if they'll distribute this presentation to the wider universe. So, the sec units are mentioned briefly before Murderbot heads into the main plot, and I was pretty sure from the start that Barish Estranza was going to regret bringing them along. Since Murderbot has been pretty reluctant to free other sec units so far, and hasn't really given all that much thought to bot liberation in general, I thought it was going to be 3 that did it. Doubly so because 3 had a good relationship with the other sec units it was deployed with, so it was more likely to feel sympathetic to these new ones. So I was pleasantly surprised when it was Murderbot that finally did decide to give them the Help Me file that Murderbot 2.0 gave 3, and instructions on how to disable their governor module. Even better, because it didn't have to. This wasn't like the situation with 3, where Murderbot 2.0 needed the help. Murderbot just decided to do it, no strings attached. It's growing, and I'm glad to see it. Those are my thoughts on the Murderbot Diaries so far. I love them. I recommend them to anyone who likes sci-fi even a little. I certainly intend to keep reading them if and when there are more. If you liked this video, I hope you'll watch more in the future. Thanks for watching this one. Bye!